So I just wanted to welcome everyone. Mayor Nutter apologizes. He was teaching class right before, and he's going to be up very shortly. But I did want to start our event since we have a limited amount of time. I'm so pleased to welcome Professor Christina Greer here with us today for a conversation on race and politics. As I'm sure you'll all agree, we have a lot to talk about these days. This is the SEPA Diversities Committee's second Dine'alogue, and it's an opportunity for students to have a conversation with a faculty member about a topic that pertains to diversity inclusion at SEPA and beyond. I say that it's a dialogue because I actually really want you to participate. Professor Greer is going to give a short 10-minute talk, but then it's up to us to really engage in that conversation and move on from where she has started us. So with that, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. So, as Samantha said, I'm just going to have 10 minutes of musings, but I like questions. So, essentially, I work on local, state, and national politics. I wrote a book called Black Ethnics that looks at Afro-Caribbean, African, and Black American political attitudes and ideologies. I follow the mayors and comptrollers. We have our former comptroller here, John Liu. I follow city politics pretty closely and speakers' races and all that good stuff. We're currently in the middle of a gubernatorial primary, so I've been following that pretty closely with Cynthia Nixon and Andrew Cuomo, who is acting totally insane, so we can talk about that. And so the importance of primaries, and we can talk about that. And then obviously the federal government, which is just, I always tell people I feel like my PhD is basically like a computer science degree from the 1960s. Like, I don't know what to do with it because all the theories that we had are a little shaky right now. So when I explain what we used to do, right? So it's like, well, we used to have rule and respect of law when it came to the president, and now we don't. So we can talk about all those things. But I passed around, or I circulated some readings that you all might want to be interested in. I don't know if they emailed them to you. But, one of them was a piece that I wrote, an op-ed I wrote about how I view the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Immigration Act as a triumvirate of acts that are slowly being dismantled by this particular administration. And so I always tell my students they need to have a favorite president. My favorite president is LBJ. I respect the movement from staunch racist segregationists from Texas to the architect behind the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Immigration Act. And so those three acts, to me, are under attack right now, roughly 50 years later, because we know that what's going on with the Voting Rights Act and gerrymandering across various states. I went to gerrymandering camp last summer, so if you have any questions about that, we can talk about that too. It was a week-long sleepaway camp for gerrymandering and the 2020 census. So I'm more than equipped to talk about that. Right, no. How to become an expert witness to deal with people who want to gerrymander and to think about the implementation of the census. And as you all may have noticed, that the citizenship question is trying to be put back onto the census, which we haven't had in over 50 years, and the implications of that, right, especially for marginalized communities who tend not to fill out the census at the same rates because, A, of interaction with the government, and B, what the government does with that information. Unfortunately, we do know that we need an accurate count of the population, A, based on the Constitution. How many of you have read the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution? Okay, so you might want to dust up on that because it's being stretched to the limit these days. But there are very few things in the Constitution, and one of the things that's in the Constitution is actually that we will take a census every 10 years of our population. And it's just supposed to be a count of people. However, we know that this particular administration wants to not only ask, are you a citizen or not, which obviously we know many families are mixed status households, and with the preponderance of ICE and aggressive measures to kick people out of this country. This particular census also has questions where they want to know, not just, sort of based on my work, are you Black American? They finally took Negro off the census in 2020. It'll be off the census. But, they want to know where your home country is. But they're asking that of Latinos, Asians, but also whites. Like, they want to know what kind of white you are and how long you've been white, right? So for this country, at a certain point in time, you all have probably heard the stories of by 2040, it'll be majority minority. First of all, there's no such thing as minority. I'm a global majority. I'm a woman and a person of color. So across the globe, more people look like me. So I don't use the term minority. But we do know that there's this collective freak out about the vast majority of people of color sort of rising up in this country, right? Blacks are now the number 3 group, Latinos are the number 2 group, and Asians, who no one seems to survey, for some reason, are a very fast-growing group of documented and undocumented, and sort of, to me, the sleeper category that we should be paying attention to, because they're not necessarily Democrats and they're not necessarily Republicans. Geography really does matter when it comes to Asian Americans, so I find them quite fascinating, but no one seems to want to survey them. So because of this collective freakout about what the United States could look like, we now see draconian measures to try and like kick people out, right? You can only make but so many more people white, right? So like you let Italians become white, you let Jews become white, you let Germans become white, you let the Irish become white. Come on in, Mayor. But at a certain point in time, you know, you run out of people who can become white, so then you have to actually start expelling people. And so that's kind of what we're seeing with the census and gerrymandering as well. So going back to the VRA, the CRA, and the Immigration Act, you know, black folks have really only been voting with the full protection of the law, and I put an asterisk on that because you all may have been paying attention in 2000, for roughly 50 years, right? And so the fact that as blacks have moved into the voting sphere, we see the importance of black women, right? If you haven't seen it, you haven't been paying attention, right? So obviously the big example is Alabama with Roy Moore and Doug Jones. And so when you look at that race, and we can talk about this as well, and so I passed out an article about hiding in plain sight about, we talk about this thing called the gender gap. There is no such thing as the gender gap. It's not that women vote Democratically and men vote Republican. It's like, no, black people vote Democratically. Black women are, as Jason Johnson says, hey, the kryptonite to the Republican Party. We cannot be moved. Everyone else, even black men, can be a little shaky. Black women are not buying whatever it is they're selling, right? And so why is it that more and more black women who get, you know, into the voting space, it's like they solidify the party. So why are they neglected, right? Why is it that in Alabama, $23 million by the Democratic Party, thanks Tom Perez, was spent catering to white men who left the party a long time ago, and guess what? They're not coming back, right? And then an independent outside agency raised $1 million, asked black women to vote, and you get 98% voting, right? So fast forward to Cynthia Nixon, who's running for governor against Andrew Cuomo. She's coming out the gate, just like, hey, guess what? I want black women. Some people call it pandering. I might say, well, isn't this just what we do with white men all the time? We explicitly go after white men. We say we're going after white men. So the one time we say we're explicitly going after black women, it seems like pandering. I'm like, maybe it's not. Maybe someone has realized that the foundation, the backbone of the Democratic Party right now, the 21st century, is the group that should be catered to. So that's one thing. But I do view the three acts as a triumvirate of acts, so we can't detangle them, especially with this particular administration. Okay, I've been talking too long, because I want you all to ask me tons of questions. And so the last thing I guess I'll talk about is cities. And so cities, as you know, when I got to graduate school, I really wanted to study cities. I went to graduate school here in New York City at Columbia University. And I said to the chair of the department, I want to write my dissertation on cities. This was in 2001. And he says, cities are dead. We're in New York City. And I didn't understand. But what he was essentially saying is, like, white people aren't in cities, and no one in political science at the time was working on cities. Urban politics had basically died out. And so if I had worked on cities at the time, I wouldn't have gotten a job. So I actually moved on and talk about race and ethnicity. But like if you all have read my book, cities are kind of this undercurrent extra character. And so I want us to also, if you all have extra questions, think about the role of the city in the 21st century and how gerrymandering plays into that. We know that pretty soon, you know, with senators, the vast majority of senators do not represent people in cities. Cities as places for people of color, marginalized communities, and immigrants, and what that means for some of the laws that we see coming out of DC and the disinvestment in cities from a particular, what I would argue, are sort of the four pillars of America and the foundation of America, being white supremacy, anti-black racism, capitalism, and patriarchy, coming from DC at this particular moment, and how that affects people of color, especially in cities. And what that also means now that white folks want cities again, and so how we're gonna have this bit of a tension, because then where do the people of color and marginalized communities go? So I'll pause there. Ask me loads of questions.
So good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here to introduce my friend, Professor Christina Greer. You should laugh. I mean, I'm like totally late. And just, you know, ask her based on some of the last statements that and I apologize, I think you guys know I teach on Wednesday. We had a special guest who I wanted you to meet, was Secretary Jay Johnson. was in my class, yeah. I want to encourage Professor Greer to, be a little more open and direct in her comments, not hold back, because I know she's
Been known to be shy.
Yeah, and I want to encourage you to get out of it. No, I'm totally teasing you.
Two words never gone together. Christina Greer and shy.
Right. We're excited to have her here. And again, sorry that I was late. Sam, thank you, and Laura, and the whole diversity committee, and certainly our dean for this opportunity. And the floor is open. You should ask Professor Greer whatever's on your mind.
And can you tell me your name and where you're from?
Yeah.
I think geography is the most important demographic.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm Zach. I'm from Washington, D.C., another city that is not dead. I was just watching a lot of the coverage of the flow into politics now is in the Democratic Party, there are a lot of groups that are approaching now as candidates, right? A lot more women, a lot more people of color who have traditionally not been candidates, right? Whether state or federal office. Do you see that there's been a change in the structural barriers that have been keeping them out historically? Or is there just a change in energy and environment that's sort of propelling their, at least, initial entry point?
I don't think that there's been a change in the structural barriers at all. And I think that that's part of the concern. And so we might see, sort of a burst in 2018, but we haven't fundamentally changed some of the rules, right? Women are rational actors. I think black people are the most rational voters, but women are rational actors, especially when it comes to running for office, right? And so oftentimes we're not in the same occupations as men. So as far as men who run tend to be partners in law firms or in business. Women somehow get, sort of falling out of the leaky pipeline, if you will. So the financial networks aren't the same. And then also it's think of it this way. If Hillary Clinton ran for the presidency and had an 11-year-old son, it would not be viewed the same way. There were so many people who didn't even know Donald Trump had an 11-year-old son, right? And so when you think about, say, when Rick Lazio ran against Hillary Clinton in 2004 Senate, he had 2 small kids. No one ever brought it up. I mean, who cares, right? But when Kirsten Gillibrand ran for Senate, it's like, should she be running for Senate? I mean, she's got small kids. Is she gonna be a good mom? When does she go home? Isn't she traveling around the state? So all these things make a difference, right? And then, these women's issues. There's no such thing as a women's issue. Going to war is an American issue. Pocketbook issues are everyone's issues. Education should be everyone's issues, not a woman's issue. Same with our racial issues, but that's a whole other chapter. So I don't think that the institutional structures have changed. I think that there are a lot of organizations that have popped up that have a lot of momentum, and there is a flood of cash, which is great. And Kirsten Gillibrand has off the sidelines, and she's given a specific amount of money just to black female candidates as well. There's Higher Heights, that's black women electing black women with black money. I'm part of that organization because we're all in for Stacey Abrams. She's a black woman running for governor of Georgia, and if she wins, she'll be the first black female governor in the history of the United States. So we still have a long way to go as far as the gender gap, right? We have, 21 female senators out of 100, right? There should be 51 if we're really talking about population. So there are a lot of things that are going on. And when you scratch the surface, the vast majority of women who are in politics are either the wives or the daughters of people who were already in politics, right? Like Nancy Pelosi's dad, first Italian mayor of Baltimore, like Kirsten Gillibrand, long line of, family, Clinton. I mean, all of these people. So I think that's also something that we have to realize. It's it's just not as easy as it seems. And people seem to get sort of left out as they move up offices, right? And so, especially women of color candidates. That's why I think the role of the State House is so important, because it is a launch pad, right? Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to ever go to Congress, got her start in the New York State Legislature. Stacey Abrams, 50 years later, got her start in the Georgia State Legislature. But as you go for these bigger offices and you're either gerrymandered, depending on where you live, or you're running statewide, well, all states are red states. It's just, do you have enough blue cities in a red state to make it a blue state in a presidential year? But if you hadn't noticed, the country's kind of racist. So there are parts of New York that I wouldn't go to at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So if you're running statewide, ask Carl McCall, who ran for governor, right? And lost to Pataki and Cuomo lost to him in the primary and said some racist stuff and had to do a mea culpa. That's a long time ago. The thing is, political history is fascinating, right? Because it's filled with sort of gender dynamics and racial dynamics. But Carl McCall learned that when he ran for New York State governor, right? And he was the state comptroller and signed the same welfare checks that his mom once got when he was a young boy. I mean, great narrative, great story, middle of the road, I would say like a harmless candidate, if you will. But it's New York State, and they weren't having it for a host of reasons. And so a Republican stays in office. So I think women are going to have a challenging time. I think there are more and more women who are participating, but as you all saw in the article, the sneaky secret that's not a secret is that white women vote Republican. So like if we think that, oh, it's just about women, it's like it's not about women. It's like getting white women to stop voting against their own interests. That's the issue. It's like all the black women in the world still don't equal, or in America, still don't equal the number of white women who are in America. And so they consistently vote against their own interests.
Yes. Oh, hold on. Sorry. You yielded your question over there.
Reclaiming my time.
Yeah.
Name and where you're from.
My name is Mark. I'm from Detroit, another city that is that white people are interested in returning to.
You guys have a white mayor too, right?
Yes, we do. Which, as soon as he came into power, he was able to actually govern because we've previously been governed for about 20 years under emergency financial manager or emergency manager laws. And so my question is, how do we address these sorts of laws that essentially in the state of Michigan, when I was applying to SEPA, 2/3 of black people didn't really have the right to vote because 2/3 of where we lived was under emergency manager laws.
Right.
And how do we, like, there's no subverting an emergency manager who's not elected and has complete and utter control over city governance.
I think we'd be crazy not to look at all the institutional barriers that sort of black mayors face, and sort of black cities have faced, and continue to face. So, like, the example I always use is, you know, when Marion Barry became the first black mayor of Washington, D.C., all of a sudden all the rules change. Like, the federal government intervenes in a way where it's like, now you care about D.C.? And it's like, no. Okay, so we have to take all this power back, right? And so I do think that it's a peculiar coincidence that now that you all have a white mayor, like, the structural mechanisms have changed now, like giving him power, right? When you look at the budget, I mean, you can speak to this, but when you look at, say, the budget of de Blasio, like 92% of it is spoken for, right, from the state government and a Democratic governor he doesn't get along with. So there are already these institutional constraints on mayors where, you know, LBJ said when cities are literally burning, right? And so, like, Detroit's on fire, Newark's on fire, Cleveland's on fire, and, like, he's got Vietnam. It looks like he's not going to run for re-election. Like, everything is a mess. And he's in the Oval Office, and he's like, you know what, as bad as it is, he's like, I always think it could be worse. I could be a mayor. Like, it's like you're president of the United States. It's like a harder job is to be a city mayor, right? So I do think that we have to look at these, like, present company included, because they expect you to do, you know, like, you know, it's like changing, what did they say? It's like being a mayor is like changing the wheels of your bicycle while you're in the Tour de France, right? Whereas presidents, no one's expecting them to sort of do anything on a dime. With a mayor, it's like, it was a problem, I expect it fixed right now, right? Or yesterday. So I think that the larger structures that give and take power away are really fascinating when you have mayors. I was working on a paper with a former professor here, and then both of us just got busy and we sort of dropped it, but I need to pick it back up because I was really interested in looking at bond ratings of cities and, like, what they were before the first black mayor, what they became when the first black mayor was there, and then what they were after the reign of black mayors. And so this is Dorian Warren, who was here before, and we had this running bet because, and I won the bet, like beyond won the bet, because we had a running bet on cities and when they lose their black mayors. So, you know, they're one and done cities, New York, Chicago, LA, no coincidence, the three largest cities, one and done, as far as black elected mayors. But then there are other sort of, we would call them like chocolate cities that, not necessarily chocolate in the sense that they have a majority of black people, because that keeps fluctuating, and now a lot of cities are like a third, when you look at Latino populations, but cities that have had consistent black mayors. your Atlantas, your DCs, your Phillies, your Baltimores, and then obviously like some tier 2 cities. And so we made, in Detroit, we made this bet as to when they would lose like their black mayor, right? So as black folks nicely get ushered out of cities, as young, gentrifying white folks who with like dead grandmas and a whole bunch of money, are able to come into cities and buy things on the cheap, when do you lose your mayor? And so it's like TikTok, DC, Philly's already done, Detroit's done. Like Baltimore had O'Malley, in like the neoliberal age. It's very likely that they could get a white mayor again because this mayor right now is a mess. She might be a friend, but she's a mess. So, I mean, that's a possibility, right? And so thinking about how the larger rules change on the state level and the federal level when different people hold the office.
No.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm from Ukraine. I have this question. Maybe it's really basic for you, but we had an argument recently with a friend. How do you define people of color? Like, is it the question of identification, like how I identify as a person of color, or is there like a scholar definition, like who is a person of color?
Right. A lot of people don't like that term. I use it just because it's easier. A lot of people go and use minority, which I refuse to use just because Blacks, Latinos, Asians, South Asians, when I sort of go down the list, it's like, well, you add us up and we're the majority. So I don't like using the term minority, right? We are a global majority, so I don't like that other term. So I just use people of color because it's I talk a lot, right? And I give long answers. So instead of always saying people, the Blacks, the Latinos, the Asians, the South Asians, et cetera, the indigenous folks in America, it's just easier for me to say people of color.
Don't be shy.
I'll start calling on people.
Yeah, that happens.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I thought your commentary was...
Where are you from?
I'm from Korea, but I live in Canada, and my last city was Michigan, in Ann Arbor. So my question, I thought your commentary on the Asians was super interesting because you're absolutely right. It depends on the location, it depends on their SES. And even within Asians, there's East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian. It's so vast. What do you think? And I think this is based on my personal observation, but even when it comes to just like race relations in America, they tend to kind of think about their own perspective and not really see the world on not really see the U.S. as a country that's based on slavery and white supremacy. It's a little different nuanced. So I guess my question would be, what would be the best way for a candidate to approach, again, block term of Asians, but Asian communities and get their voting and all that stuff?
Well, I mean, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local, right? And so I think it really depends on the region because the way this country has treated Asian Americans from the past 10 generations is this idea of forever foreigner, right? So we've had the 1880, the 1917, the 1924 various exclusion acts that specifically targeted Asians, to say nothing of good old FDR and his concentration camps. So, I'm sorry, what does he call them? Internment camps. Internment camps. And that's a whole nother part of our history in World War II. Mm-hmm. So I would say, it really depends because if you're in California and you have a Chinese population that's 10th generation all the way down to first generation and people who got here last week, how you talk about politics and money and needs and education are very different, right? Because you have some people who have completely assimilated in and they actually don't like newcomers, right? I mean, that sort of idea of closing the door, the same way when you can poll certain Mexicans in Arizona and they are for the wall and, like Arpaio, and it's like, what? It's like, listen, I'm in. Shut the door and lock it, right? Sort of like Robert Moses, who's Jewish and hated sort of the post-Holocaust Jewish folks, right? Because he just thought that they were not of the same stock as sort of the Jewish folks that came in with his parents. So it's a common phenomenon. We've seen it over time. Whereas in New York City, I mean, that's when you have to think more about coalitions. And so it's obviously there's not a large enough Chinese American population, full stop, to be the majority in a voting sphere. So it's how do you then frame your issues as issues that work with Latinos, Blacks, whites, whomever? And we see this. I mean, we've been able to figure out to a certain extent, the Latino question. So I just think it's on the side of social scientists, it's a little lazy. Because, I mean, when I put together the data for Black Americans and Caribbeans and Africans, it had never been done before. And I was like, why? You know, it's possible. Like, we've been having these conversations for decades. We know that Africans exist. I mean, look at all the HBCUs and all the sort of Black freedom fighters that went back to their home countries. They were all African. Like, we get it. And the vast majority of Caribbeans who've been here for like 4 and 5 generations. So, like, we just have to, you know, spend the resources. This also, though, is why the census is so important to me, because you know, if you look at the numbers and it's like, oh, well, it's not that many Asians in my district, so like, who cares? Like, I don't really need to like focus on their issues or cater to them. It's like, well, there actually are a lot, right? But for whatever reason, they have not filled out the census. Mm-hmm. So then fast forward when it comes to education resources or allocations of whatever types of resources, we just don't have it. And that's no fault of the community that doesn't fill it out, but it's a real world problem. And then social scientists are using this data that's based on census data, right? So if you've ever gone to a stats class and used ACS data or whatever it may be, it's like, well, that's based on the census, but if the census is collected incorrectly or, you know, not done well, right? So after the 2010 census, and we conducted it, or, you know, we sort of had data released in 2011, and it showed that Queens lost population. Like, that's virtually impossible. Like, anyone who's ever been to Queens, you know that every single stop on the 7 train is like 12 different countries, right, represented. So the fact that they lost population, it's like, no, it's a highly immigrant borough, and the vast majority of people didn't fill out the census. So, like, one city council member, I forgot who, was trying to, like, figure out a way to get a better estimate of the population. So he was like, I'm looking at doorbells in these houses, because a lot of families are sort of like taking these single family homes, which are zoned only for single family, but they're kind of chopping them up illegally and making them into apartments. So it's like this one family home has 8 doorbells. So that tells me that like maybe,
for every person
yeah,
that lives there.
like
Right.
exactly. And so like each doorbell might represent 4 to 5 people, you know, in one house. And so I think the reason why I'm literally losing sleep about the census is because it affects me as a scholar, because that means the data that I'm getting that's based on the census is shoddy data. And that means my hypotheses and my data output and what I'm writing about and publishing in journals that policymakers then read, right? Or young academics who will then make policy are sort of getting improper information. And so my colleague Karthik Ramakrishnan, who's at UC Irvine, is doing a lot with sort of surveying Asian populations. But again, you sort of have like the kind of New York, California question, where it's like, well, you know, if you've ever been to Atlanta or New Orleans, like there are these, or Houston or Dallas, like there are these growing populations, but right now the money isn't into really like doing a deep dive. And to me, I'm fascinated because you have someone who's, say, your age, who might be a hardcore Democrat, for whatever reasons, and then parents may be hardcore Republicans, super Trumpites, even after everything that he says, but based on either aspirational economic concerns or, you know, small business ownership and thinking that, you know, financially that's the way to go, or for social issues as far as, you know, abortion, gay marriage, whatever it may be.
Hands up, you guys did actually sign up for this. Dr. Greer.
I'm Diana, I'm from Toronto. I guess something that I had never considered that was lost on me is I think I just assumed like the census was maybe like legally mandated to fill out, but I guess from what you're saying it's not. Is that the case in most countries, or is that specific to the U.S.?
I don't know about other countries. I'm an Americanist, so I feel like I got my hands full here. So it is mandated in our Constitution, and like our Constitution is like bare bones. It's like we don't know who's here, we don't know who's coming. It's like 10 of us in a room writing this thing, and we'll see, right? It's like as we just like rape and pillage and steal land. Let's see if it works out. So it says that we are just to account for our population every 10 years. That's it. So how we do that is based on like the leadership of the census, but you get directives from the federal government. And this particular administration, we know, if you don't know, now you know, has a very specific white supremacist agenda. So for us to think that the census, of all things, wouldn't be affected by that agenda, we'd be gravely mistaken, right? Because we have to sort of create white people, like as far as this administration's concerned, and how we will then give things to white people. Because of Arpaio and ICE and things like that, we already know that, immigrants tend to fill out the census less. People of color in general just tend to fill out surveys less, just because A, most people don't want to interact with the federal government if they don't have to, right? And B, sort of white folks are always told, like, your opinion matters. So it's like when something comes across, it's like, oh, of course I should fill it out. Like, I'm important, right? That's why if you ever pay people to do surveys, you have to usually overpay for men of color, especially. They're sort of the hardest group to reach. So there's kind of the psychology of filling things out, first of all. And then when we get the information, there are a lot of people who are scared as to like what it will be used for, right? I'm a grown woman with a PhD and a full-time job, and technically a job for life. I'm concerned about filling out the census, and I'm not in a mixed status household. I'm not an immigrant, right? I don't live with an immigrant, but I'm still sort of like, I don't know if I want them to have this information. I know I need to fill it out because I want to make sure that my community gets resources as far as like polling stations. I mean, like the micro
grants.
stuff,
Yeah.
Say nothing about like police and fire and things like that, but like, how much money are we going to get sort of like in a transportation budget or like a roads budget? I mean, things that would really matter to my community. So we know that immigrant communities will probably not fill it out at great rates. I'm on the board of BAJI, which is the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and like Black undocumented immigrants are 10% of the population, but 20% of the deportations. So like already, why would that group fill out the census? I can't blame them for doing that. We know that Asians are the fastest growing undocumented population in the United States and the most likely to live in a mixed status household and community. Can't blame them for not filling. I can't blame an Asian American citizen for not filling out the census, because if you live with someone who's not documented, you might have that fear that this document could be used for some sinister purpose. So then we're knocking out full-on families and widespread communities.
Or there's a possibility that you might be sent to a summer camp.
Right, exactly. Because, like FDR did, and we talk about FDR like he's the greatest. I'm like, you do know that he's the one who signed that, right? And so like that was an executive order. That didn't go through Congress. That was just him with the slide of the pen. So like, the integration of the armed services, an executive order, right? The Emancipation Proclamation, an executive order. Japanese internment camps, executive order. So we've used them for great things in the past, and we've also used them to sort of change the face of history for the worse.
Questions? Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My name is Samantha. I am from New York, but really Long Island, because if you say that for New Yorkers, they get upset. So I'm interested in this. This is the first I've heard about white people being added to this census. And like 10 or 15 years ago, Bonilla Silva had kind of this new triracial theory about how like light-skinned Latinos were gaining privilege and becoming like a new kind of level of whiteness. And so I wonder, in trying to figure out like who the right white is, if we're gonna see groups of white people losing privileges that formerly had them. And I also think that this is in like, in the context of a lot of the anti-Semitism and things that have been going on. I just wanted to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that's why this administration wants to know what kind of white you are. Because, being Jewish is a unique thing in this country because it's a culture and a religion, but sort of wrapped into like a race, right? And so we still haven't had a larger conversation as a nation about like what is race. It's a social construct. It's completely made up. Like my brain isn't bigger or smaller than yours, but it does have real world social and political and economic implications, right? So it's like, yeah, are you Polish white, like German white, or Greek white?
Well,
yeah,
I
I mean like,
but I think that, yeah, but
Right.
but also the president, I mean, pretty much out of his own mouth, a couple months back, said that we need more people like the folks from Norway.
yeah. Because we know he likes
Because you
Eastern
had a press
Europeans.
conference with
He's
the
got
King of
2
Norway,
wives.
so okay.
Right. But we also know that, he said on several occasions, he's German and he's got good genes. So he believes in sort of good genes versus bad genes, right? If you say you have good genes, then that by de facto means that someone else has bad genes. So he wants to know all of these things specifically. But race is a funny thing in this country, right? So you think about the Parkland shooter, who's Cuban, but we've never said he's a Latino, right? Now, if he were from the Dominican Republic, or even if he were from Puerto Rico, which is an American territory, by the way. So when the president says, I want to talk to the president of Puerto Rico, I'm like, talk to yourself, homie. It's you. Like, read a book.
You're in charge.
He doesn't get it.
Right now.
But, you know, think about it. Like, if that shooter, God forbid that shooter was brown, like, can't even imagine if he were Sikh or Muslim or Indian, right? But just brown, period. But if he were from the DR or the PR, it would be like these Latinos sneaking in our country. It's like even someone from Puerto Rico who can come and go freely, but whatever, we'd have to put that on pause. But the fact that he's Cuban and like crickets, he's treated as a white person. So like that's a totally different conversation. It's like your last name is Cruz, right? So it's like we're all looking at this like, but this is also why geography matters, because how Latino-ness plays out in Florida, in southern Florida, Cubans versus Dominicans versus Puerto Ricans versus all the other Spanish-speaking Latinos from Central and South America is very different, right? So I think it would have mattered if he was Venezuelan versus Colombian. Like, I do think that that would have played out differently. So we're just looking at this guy and everyone's talking about him like he's white, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll just play along, right? But that, to me, that's why this president wants to know.
Yeah. I guess my other question about it, too, is do you think that we're going to see those groups who have been granted privileges, like let's just say Cuban, Americans, do you think that we're going to see those groups align more with people of color in the future because rights are being taken away?
I think geography matters.
Right.
I do. I mean, keep in mind when you think about the Parkland kids, like a quarter of that school is black. Mm-hmm. You look at what's going on in the news, it's like, I didn't know there was a single black person at the school, right? Mm-hmm. A week before the Parkland shooting, they had like a Black History Month celebration, and the mic got pulled because they were talking about Black Lives Matter. So like clearly they've got some issues going on at that school, but in that particular region as well. So how the allies come together, and like, the allies ships, I mean, this is the piece that I'm trying to conceptualize. I haven't written about it yet. But like, is a short-term ally good enough for me? Sometimes you do need short-term allies. It's like, we got to get something done. Everybody in the pool, let's do it. And then we dissolve, and that's okay. Or it's like, if we're not a sustained allyship, like, what's the point? And we can talk about the Women's March.
Just one observation on
chapter.
when you mentioned Parkland. I'm coming to you and then down the road. And this is, so it'd be crystal clear. This is not a commentary or even a comment about the young people. But it is a little amazing that when they decided to put, I think it was 5 of the Parkland students on the cover of Time magazine, right? So not their decision. School's 25% black. You don't put one student of color with that group. I mean, all 5 are, in this bizarre, tragic context, have emerged as leaders, as stars, as voices. I mean, they're doing their thing, and I'm very, very proud of them. But some adult person somewhere with some level of sensitivity should have figured out, oh, okay. I mean, we got Emma, and we got, I think it was Dylan, and we got this one, and that one. Okay. Now, where's, because some of the students have some of the other students have, right? I mean, just like, you got to think about this.
Well, especially when
It's
you think
the
about
cover of Time magazine. It's not a
Right.
candid shot of a bunch of students walking down the street. I mean, do you have any idea how long it takes to take the photo for the cover of Time magazine? They took a lot of photos.
But kids from Chicago have been organizing for 10 years. Like, similar context.
They're not on the
but-
cover of anything. Over here and then back around the horn.
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much.
Name, where are you from?
Shamira. I'm Ugandan American and grew up in Georgia, outskirts of Greater Metro Atlanta. And I guess I kind of have a 2-part question. One, just an idea or getting your idea of political forecasting. How do you think that people of color, specifically Black people, are playing a bigger role in the Democratic Party, or are you finding that Black people and maybe people of color in general are distancing themselves from the Democratic Party and potentially being more independent? And what do you think that would mean for the two-party system in America? Would you see in the future we could kind of break this electoral college and kind of this Republican versus Democrat? Because that's something that, I don't know, I feel like for me it's been really hard to identify as a Democrat. Of course, I identify with those ideals, but I don't necessarily see myself reflected in the Democratic Party.
So I think if we're going to have a third party that rises up, it'll be led by Black folks, just because of this disillusionment. But here's what's always happened in American democracy. Now, granted, this is all pre the shenanigans that we're seeing right now, but we've always had a two-party system. We called it different things. We had Whigs and Democratic Republicans, et cetera, through time. And so let's just say Party A and Party B. And what has always happened is when we've had this moment where a third party emerges, one of two things happens. Either it gets subsumed by one of the parties, and like the ideas get co-opted, and so Party B just takes it over, and so it's like BC together versus A, right? And then we sort of see the reign of BC. Or that third party rises up, and then it subsumes one of the parties. And so whatever it is, we always tend to go back to this resting place of a two-party system. This is what George Washington warned us against in his farewell address, right? And he was very concerned about it. There's no mention of parties in the Constitution at all. But in our quest to move away from this kind of British ideal of thinking in the parliamentary system and sort of its multiple activities, and sort of people relying on all these different sort of specific identities, we've kind of rested in these two-party systems. Not to say that that's going to be the way forever, but like that's, for the past 200 some odd years, we've always somehow gone back to the red team versus the blue team. Now, as far as Black folks, we are in the middle of a civil war in the Democratic Party, as evidenced by the 2016 election, right? So you have the progressive faction and sort of this middle of the road faction. Both strategies tend to make sense to some people, right? Some people think, like if you have a distribution curve, I call it like Clintonista Cuomo faction of the party. They're in the middle and they think, let's clean up and get these, you know, weak-leaning Republicans, let's get some independents, and then let's get the Democrats, right? And let's keep chasing these white men who left with Reagan. But that's their mission, and but that's a way to sort of get a lot of folks, and that's how we've usually won in the past, right? So Bill Clinton, centrist Democrat. Barack Obama, centrist Democrat. I always tell people, I'm like, the only thing radical about him is the skin color, because when you look at the policies, he's like a step above neoliberalism, but he's kind of a neoliberal president. I know he's probably a friend, but again. But then you have the other faction of the war, which is like the progressives, right? And so people were like, if we're supposed to be Democrats, big D Democrats, let's actually behave this way. And so that means we have to have certain policies where we're unwavering about, you know, marriage equity, women's right to choose, prison reform, the list goes on, right? The messenger was Bernie, not a fan. I'm like, okay, you're Mr. Civil Rights, yet no Black people had ever heard of you before 2016, but okay. So imperfect messenger, but you know, the message is sort of there. But we're seeing that now sort of play out in New York State politics, right? So you have Cuomo, center of the road, and then you have Cynthia Nixon, who's like, hey, let's talk about some Black women, let's talk about prisons, let's go to NYCHA, let's do all these things that like a real progressive Democrat is supposed to be. Well, a Democrat is a Democrat. A Democrat does not equal progressive, right? So we have sort of these two factions. And there are different strategies, like the primary versus the general strategy. And some people are like, well, if we're trying to win, right, we need to stay at the center of the road so we can pick up these independents and these weak-leaning Republicans, and then in the general, we win in November. Cynthia Nixon, obviously, or you know, the Bernie-esque people say, no, let's like stick to our core principles that will actually draw people out and get them motivated to participate, and then we'll actually get more numbers and we'll be okay in the general, right? Because, you know, Trump is like way out in the ether. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons why he won, but one of them might be illegal. But I do think that when we're sort of we have not figured out the Civil War, which is what makes me worried about 2018 and 2020. Mm-hmm. But we have to sort of, when we think about Black voters in particular, because that's pretty much all I really care about when I write, and sort of at the end of the day, it's like, I care about Black people, and I'm unapologetic about that. Black voters as very strategic voters, right? Because we know what it looks like to have things take it away. And we also know what it looks like to just not have things at all, right, politically. So how we think about politics and participation in politics is unique, and it's not like other racial groups. And so Charles Hamilton, who actually used to be in the poli-sci department here, he's like the godfather of black politics, wrote a book in '73 where he talks about sort of black voters sort of having this sort of tension, this dichotomy between sort of advancement stage and sort of this practical protectionist phase, right? And so Cynthia Nixon and the Bernies of the world essentially say, you know, if you have these progressive ideals, and not all black voters have these progressive ideals, but, you know, because black voters can be very sort of middle of the road or conservative, but they still vote Democrat for the most part, so especially on national elections. But if you are a progressive Democrat, come with me. Like, you can actually get what you want, right? Like, progressive values. We can advance policy issues together. What's fascinating is that even now, you see sort of Cuomo's surrogates sort of putting out this protectionist phase argument already. So it started yesterday, and it's only going to grow louder, which is, why would you do that? Because if she wins, then Molinaro, who's going to be the Republican nominee, almost 99% he'll be the Republican nominee, he'll win for sure. So by going with this advancement candidate, you're essentially handing the race to a Republican. So why don't you just stay with the protectionist phase? He's your second choice, right, possibly, but you won't lose major in November, right? So slow and steady, and then he'll give you some things here and there. Well, some people argue, well, it's like, well, you'll never really advance if you stay in protectionist phase. So there's always this tension because a lot of black voters will consistently vote for their second choice to stay in protectionist phase because it's like, you know what, a little bit of something is better than nothing. And we know what nothing looks like, right? And we also know, like, if this Republican gets in here, we could really end up not just with nothing, but like with worse than nothing. So maybe we stick with Cuomo, right? Or maybe we stick with insert name of centrist candidate running against a super progressive. And that's a real tension that I think a lot of black voters struggle with. Like, whatever Cynthia Nixon is selling is like right on message with what a lot of progressive black Democrats specifically want. However, if Cuomo can convince them, or his surrogates can convince them that going with Nixon will ultimately hurt them in November, then they'll go with Cuomo all day long.
Yeah, that's the she can't win strategy.
Yeah.
Olivia.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm also from Washington, D.C. If we are to miraculously get this census correct and bypass these structural biases and also pragmatic ones, how do we approach overcoming this psychological mistrust that is like so deeply rooted?
Sorry, say one more time.
If we're to bypass the structural biases and actually get a correct census, how do we overcome the psychological mistrust that is so deeply rooted and will probably take way longer to overcome? Whose responsibility is that? Do you think it lies in education? Is that why you're an academic? If not,
Yeah, I mean, I had my students make PSAs last semester, like in a perfect world, like let's just say the census wasn't totally like, you know, anti-immigrant and super racist. Like, how would you target communities to actually get them to turn out? And they sort of chose various indigenous communities, and they had, you know, PSAs in native languages, because it's obviously it's an education effort as well, right? And you need someone who's a core leader in your community to sort of convince others to do it. I mean, the problem is, it's like, we've now introduced like a poison pill into our democracy. And so how do we undo like the last 18 months, right? Let's just say Trump doesn't get reelected. Let's just say, I'm not definitely saying that he won't at this point in time. It's a 50-50 shot. But let's say he doesn't and he's just there for 4 years. Like, I don't know how long it's gonna take us to undo the 4 years. Not just domestic and international policy, but the ideas, right? This like, you know, the 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, judicial, but you know, if you ever took Intro to American Politics, the 4th branch of government is the media, right? And it's like, but you've now just said that that whole branch is corrupt and should never be trusted. Like, how do we undo? You've literally called all facts into question, right? Anything you disagree with is just fake, which is a really dangerous precedent because now we're seeing other politicians do that, our Democratic mayor included, right? And so it goes across partisanship as well, and it goes across office. So I don't know. Like, I don't know how we untangle this knot, because we're gonna have to do some like real trust building. And it's not like politicians had a ton of trust in a lot of these communities in the first place. I mean, so like that's the crazy thing too, right? So now it's gone way off the rails, and I don't really know. I wish I had a solution, but I don't. I'll make my answer shorter.
And the white first, and then, yeah.
Ali from Jamaica. I guess along the lines of incentivizing immigrant communities to participate in something of this nature, like, I guess my question is, why are we even doing that in a time when it might not be safe for them to do that? And how do we approach that? And like, I come from a mixed status household. My mom would probably be freaked out by me filling it out, and I am a white woman in America, and no one's coming for me. Like, it's, I guess I wonder, like, how we manage that.
I don't know. I mean, like, literally when we were making these PSAs, I was like, I can't in good conscience convince anybody to fill out this census. Like, I don't even know if I'm gonna fill out the census. Probably, but I'm not saying definitely, right? So I definitely wouldn't try and convince an immigrant, documented or not, to fill it out. Because I can't protect you, and B, I don't know what they're gonna do with it. So like that to me is like what's so frightening. Literally, when I say it keeps me up at night, like I have to play Bejeweled on my phone just to like bring my blood pressure down, because at the end of the day, after doing all that I do, it's like that's when I always think about the census, like at the end of the day. And it really worries me, because this is now, we're gonna have a real lopsided series of benefits given to communities who don't have to worry about it. And they'll be able to prove that they're like the right type of American, in quotes, right?
My question's about incarceration. So, like, you know, obviously in a country that incarcerates like heavily, by far, like Black people, and how that's also tied into like voting rights. Like if you're on parole or probation, or if you, like, depending on state, like if you're an ex person who were in prison before, then like you get your voting right taken away. And I see that like heavily as influencing, like, we just can't vote, so obviously your voice is not heard. So like, I guess, but there's also, you know, a lot goes into incarceration, like racial profiling, depending on what the police officers think and all that stuff. So what do you think would be like obviously all that racism that exists within our society, it takes a while for it to go away. But what's your like number one step that you see in order to, like, I don't know, challenge this like lack of voting rights for people who have been incarcerated or who are on parole, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's education. I mean, a lot of people don't know that they actually can participate because it depends on your state, right? Like, we don't have a federal rule as to whether or not you can participate, right? And there's a lot of misinformation. And so, like, the woman, is she in Mississippi or Florida, where she had gotten her rights taken away, and then she tried to vote, and now she's going back to prison for 5 years, right? So, like, you hear one story like that, you're never going to try and vote again, right? I mean, like, that is, like, they sentenced her for 5 years for a reason. Like, that is sending a real signal where it's just like, don't even bother, right? And I always make the argument that voting is hereditary. So if your parents don't vote, then the chances of you voting are significantly decreased, right? Not saying that you never will, but if you come from a family where your parents can't vote, then that also significantly decreases it, because it's not a family thing, right? It's not something you're talking about.
Right.
It's not like, oh, September 13th, like, we need to have a voting plan, right? I mean, we usually vote every, you know, sort of Tuesday, second Tuesday of September. We're not doing it this year because of 9/11, so we're voting on that Thursday. We actually have to have that information, right, and that conversation. So when it comes to incarceration and restoring rights, I mean, just think about it. I mean, it's like voting is one of the most sacred elements of being a citizen. That's why it took, that's why they take it away from you, and that's why it took so long for communities of color to be able to do it. It's a huge deal, right? Like, you are essentially giving someone the power to be the architect of their own democracy. By taking it away from them, and ergo their progeny, right? That's such a powerful thing to be able to do as the state. There is no it's not surprising that, like, it's disproportionately affecting Black people, Latino people, and poor people. I mean, people where it's like they need actually to be voting at the highest rates, but they vote at the least rates. So I don't know. I think it's an information gap that needs to be filled.
Couple last questions. Anybody? Please give Dr. Greer a big round of applause.